Right, so the new Lords of the Fallen just launched today, and today we'll be testing it with an RTX 4070 paired with a 12700K CPU. I'll put up all the specs on the screen right now, and that again is paired with 32 gigabytes of DDR4 4000 megahertz CL18 memory. Let's just go over the settings here. One thing, I actually recorded this video and I had to redo it. Resolution scale for some reason gets set to 50% if you disable DLSS. Anyway, so we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p and 4K. So we'll be starting at 1080p first. Let's just apply the settings here, and then we'll start off on the ultra preset, and the only thing that we're going to be changing is we'll disable all these post-processing effects. Okay, so I mean, there's still post-processing quality there, but no motion blur, film grain or chromatic aberration. And you can see at 100% resolution scale, the performance is terrible. I mean, we're not getting 60 frames per second with an RTX 4070 at 1080p, and I'm not sure why. I mean, it's not the worst looking game, but it's far from the best looking game. Unreal Engine 5 just seems to have quite a bit of issues when it comes to performance. At least they seem to have resolved the stuttering issues. I played for about an hour and 15 minutes or so. I'm actually a little bit further than this area. I just finished the second boss, but the stuttering issues aren't what I expected, judging from all the pre-release reviews. They complain a lot about stuttering, and so far, I mean, you can just have a look at the frame time graph there and the 1% and 0.1% lows. For some reason, I actually died. That's the beauty of benchmarking. You can't really see your health when there's a performance metrics in the way. That's my excuse anyway. Doesn't really matter. I needed to go back and restart the checkpoint anyway if I want to test any further. But you can see that this is definitely not acceptable. 40s dropping down into the high 40s there even. Definitely not what you'd expect from an RTX 4070 at 1080p. Sure, it is on Ultra, and I'm pretty sure that Lumen gets enabled. Now that's software ray tracing that comes with the Unreal Engine 5. So let's just see if we can actually get a playable frame rate here if we enable DLSS. Right, so let's just do DLSS on quality, and you can see that our frame rate in the top left hand corner there already went up to 74. Right, so DLSS definitely helps if you want to play at 1080p and get a 60 frames per second. I mean, it should go a little bit higher than 60, but you can lock it to 60 and you'll have a pretty decent experience, right? Still unfortunate. Let's just go back to the world of the living here because it just looks better. The frame rate is slightly lower here, so this is where we'll be testing. But I mean, we are maintaining 60 frames per second. Our 0.1% lows and 1% lows aren't terrible, but you can just see from the frame time graph there that there doesn't seem to be many stuttering issues. I keep on pressing shift for run, but V is actually run, which is terrible. The only reason why I'm playing this with a keyboard and mouse is because I need to press some benchmarking keys, whatever. Anyway, so at 1080p, definitely not the best experience if you play on Ultra, right? So let's just enable frame generation because it does support DLSS 3 frame generation. I'm just running out of range here, and we'll enable frame generation right now. Right, so going from 73 to 120 frames per second. Let's just reset our numbers here. Another frame time graph is even flatter. That's definitely pretty good. And sure, you do get a little bit of an input latency penalty when it comes to DLSS 3 frame generation, but this game is perfectly fine at 60 frames per second, so it's not really that important when it comes to input latency. Sure, you need to time your parries and your dodges pretty well, but I don't think it's going to make a world of difference if you do increase your input latency by 5 to 10 milliseconds. I'm definitely not good at this game. I've never been good at Souls games, but I do enjoy them. They give a bit of a challenge, but as soon as it starts getting a little bit too difficult, then then it just is no longer fun for me. Doesn't make it a bad game. That's just me. That's a skill issue, definitely. So let's just get all these, and I'll restart the checkpoint, and we can start testing at 1440p. Right, sorry, before we go to 1440p, I actually wanted to test at high first. So if we we just go down to the high preset here, and we'll disable DLSS and all that kind of nonsense. So just make sure that you do disable frame generation before you disable DLSS, because the moment you disable DLSS, you can't toggle frame generation. But I've seen in some cases where it stays on, which is quite weird. And also VSync, sometimes it stays on even if you enable frame generation, right? So if you enable frame generation, that says unavailable or disabled, but sometimes it stays on. So some UI issues, some menu issues, so just make sure of your settings that everything is as it should be. Right, so now we're on the high preset at 1080p, still no DLSS and no frame generation. Let's just start our count here. And you can see we previously couldn't maintain 60 frames per second. Now we are basically where we were with DLSS set to quality, between 70 and 80 frames per second. So I definitely think that high is where you should be playing this game, unless you've got like a 4080 or 4090 ultra gaming. It's just a little bit too computationally expensive in my opinion. And generally the differences between high and ultra, not really that big. Some games it can be, but it's not worth the frame rate penalty in my opinion. Right, so the high preset seems to be where you want to be. I did test it earlier at 1440p and 4K as well, and the high presets seem to be pretty fine. As I said, the second time I'm recording this video, but it's because the stupid resolution scale, I didn't notice that. Rookie mistake. Anyway, so let's just see if we enable DLSS here, if it makes a bit of a difference. So just DLSS on quality, just reset our numbers, and we went from between 80 to 90 to around 90 and 110 now. So not the biggest difference, but if consistency is what you're after, DLSS quality will probably provide that. And then obviously if you want a very high refresh rate experience, we can always enable frame generation as well. And sure, it does increase the input latency, so it's not a true experience, high refresh rate experience that is, but motion fluidity wise it definitely is. And I'm dead. Right, so I just restarted the checkpoint because I died. I really can't see my health there, so it's a little bit annoying. I might just probably just move it to the right hand side of the screen. But you see, like, I take 3 hits and my health is pretty low, and I keep on pressing the wrong button there for healing. That doesn't help either. See, I'm a rookie when it comes to Souls games. Anyway, we'll just kill this guy, and then we'll move on to frame generation at 1080p on the high preset. So as you can see, we're getting around 103 frames per second there, and let's enable frame generation here. Alright, and then it went up to 155, which is quite a big jump, 55% increase in the frame rate there. Let's not say increase in performance, because that's also not the correct terminology to use. But the motion fluidity, I'm playing on a 165 hertz monitor at the moment. I mean, I'm capturing it via a 4K 120 hertz capture card, so it is capped to 120 hertz output. But it is, and I died again. Gee, I should really start concentrating now. Anyway, so this is a pretty good experience for me on this monitor, getting a high refresh rate experience. I mean, I'm not going to be playing this game at this resolution on this GPU, so I'll be testing at 1440p as soon as I stop dying. Alright, so I'm just going to go back to the checkpoint, and then we'll really start with 1440p. Right, we're now at 1440p, and no upscaling, no DLSS super resolution or frame generation. We're on the ultra preset, just with all these motion blur settings disabled. The game looks pretty good, it looks pretty sharp, but the performance is not there, right? But just as I said, it does enable ray tracing or Lumen at on the ultra preset. I'm not sure about the high preset. It doesn't really say anything in the menus about ray tracing, but this game does support Lumen, so I would assume that on the ultra preset it enables Lumen. That's why the frame rate is so low, right? And I mean, that's just any game, once you start enabling ray tracing, it becomes a little bit of an issue, especially at native resolution. So for some reason, I can't remember how I threw grenades earlier. Like, I really need to be playing on the controller, because that's how I started this game. But for the benchmarking, I'm just on the keyboard at the moment, because it's just easier to reset the numbers, etc. But performance-wise, this is definitely not great. All right, not going to be wasting too much time there. Let's see if DLSS super resolution can help us here. So once again, let's just go to quality, even though quality is only giving us 60 frames per second here. Let's just apply that and see. We're not going to maintain 60 frames per second, that I can guarantee you. Let's just reset the numbers, and maybe I should just heal up first and see if I can remember how to throw grenades. Oh, there we go. This makes the fights quite a bit easier, actually. See, now I'm a Pro Souls player. All right. I'm not really. Anyway, so 60 frames per second with the DLSS set to quality on the Ultra preset. Not really worth it, but we're in that range where we can actually safely enable a frame generation. I'd say a minimum of 50 frames per second, although 60 does feel slightly better. And you can see we went up from 60 frames per second to around 90 frames per second, right? And this is still on the Ultra preset. We can definitely drop DLSS down to balanced to get a high refresh rate experience. Once again, I'm saying experience, all I mean is the motion fluidity on the monitor side. But even on DLSS quality, 90 frames per second definitely is pretty good. I mean, the game feels good, and I'm going to die again if I don't get out of here. Let's just heal up again. And I think one of the big reasons why I keep on dying is because I keep on pressing shift for run, and shift is not run, shift is a block. So V is run, which is a very weird key for sprinting. Anyway, so I mean, that's it for the Ultra preset. Anyway, I'm going to reset the checkpoint again, and then we'll test at high. Right, so I just disabled all DLSS, frame generation, all that kind of stuff. Let's just switch this down to high. And now we're still not getting 60 frames per second, right? I'll just update the pinned comment regarding ray tracing, just to make sure what kind of ray tracing actually gets enabled by which settings. I think medium has no ray tracing, but let me just update the pinned comment. And I died, like, I mean, this is quite embarrassing, and yeah, that's all I'm going to say about that. As I said, I really can't see my health there, and I'm not used to dying so quickly. That's my excuse. I mean, you can say it as it is, that I do suck in this game, and you won't be lying. Let's do my cheesy trick. Now they don't stand a chance. All right. It's quite annoying when you hit the wall. Alright, so on the high preset, not giving us 60 frames per second, but let's just return to the world of the living, because the frame rate does seem to be slightly different. I mean, it went, that's pretty much the same, so around 50 frames per second. Right, so let's see if we then enable DLSS here. We'll just stick with quality once again, and you can see that our frame rate there went up to around 80 frames per second again, which is pretty good. Sorry if there's a little bit of background noise. It's quite warm here. We are going through a little bit of a heat wave, and there's a fan going. If there's no fan, I'd be dying in this room. Right, so DLSS quality gets us, like, see what I mean if you hit a wall. Right, so DLSS set to quality gets us to around 80-90 frames per second, which is perfectly good for this game. As I said, anything above 60 I'd be happy with. But let's see, once we enable frame generation here, and we went from 80-90 to around 120 frames per second, which is a pretty good increase. And as I said, the input latency is not going to be a big issue, because you'll probably be playing this game with a controller anyway, and input latency is less noticeable on a controller, and it is even slightly higher on a controller anyway. And 110 frames per second is definitely pretty okay, I think. It's just on the ultra and high presets, it does struggle quite a bit at native, but as I said, I'll update the pinned comment regarding which ray tracing settings get enabled with which presets. Alright, so now it's time for 4K. Right, but now at 4K, let's just apply that, and I don't think we should do ultra at 4K. I mean, we're not going to be running out of VRAM. That's probably the only good thing about Unreal Engine at the moment, is that VRAM management seems to be quite okay. I mean, we're using 7.4 gigabytes of VRAM here. You can see we've got VRAM allocated and then VRAM usage, and around 7.2 gigabytes at 4K Ultra, which in my mind is pretty okay, but I mean the frame rate is definitely not. Sure, the game looks pretty amazing, but when it comes to playing it, I'm not so sure. So let's just enable DLSS here. Once again, I don't think 4K Ultra should be what you're aiming for with a 4070. So let's just enable DLSS here. I'm just going to enable the frame rate counter to see where we get around 60 frames per second. So DLSS balanced, not DLSS performance, not, and DLSS. Okay, so DLSS Ultra Performance is the only one that can get us 60 frames per second. Yeah. Okay, and as I said, this is pretty much where you'd be able to enable frame generation anyway. Wow, these guys dead. Like usually when you rest, the guys respawn, and I did rest. I think I actually did not. All right, so that's my mistake. So 60 frames per second DLSS Ultra Performance at 4K on the Ultra preset. Not what you should be aiming for, I think. That's just my opinion. Once again, I just hate it when you hit the walls. Anyway, so this is not going to be the best experience. It'll dip below 60 frames per second. So let's just enable frame generation here. You can see we're dipping below 55 even. So just on that verge of being able to enable frame generation. Right, so 60 frames per second there, enable frame generation, and going up to around 80. Okay. Once again, don't think you should play like this. I'm just showing you the settings here, what you can expect if you have this GPU. And I mean, 80 frames per second is pretty good, but you might as well just go a preset lower, go to high or even a medium if you want to play at 4K. I mean, it does look pretty good, but you have to make quite a bit of sacrifices when it comes to DLSS Ultra Performance, and I did not mean to do that. So as you can see, like, there's not a lot of stuttering going on here. There was a pretty big stutter there, but apart from all that, during this whole run, there was very minimal stuttering actually. And now the input latency is actually becoming a bit of an issue. I can actually feel it. So if your final output is around 70 frames per second, you'll definitely start feeling the input latency. And now it might actually impact your playing ability, right? So definitely 4K on the Ultra preset and a no-go. All right, let's drop it down to high and see what happens. All right, so the stupid game just crashed. So we're at 4K now, no DLSS, no frame generation on the high preset, and things don't look much better. Sure, we are getting 10 frames per second higher than previously, which is around 30% performance increase. But when it comes to the final FPS numbers, not worth it actually. I mean, unless you are aiming for 4K 30, I do know people that that prefer playing at 4K 30. Nothing wrong with that. Personally, I just prefer to play at a higher frame rate. So I'm not going to be wasting too much time at 4K 30. If you want 30 frames per second, high 4K native is definitely the way to go then. And I'm probably going to die once again. Right, so let's just enable DLSS here, see what we need to do to get 60 frames per second. All right, so let's just enable DLSS here, see what we need to do to get 60 frames per second. Previously, we had to go all the way to Ultra Performance to get 60. I think as the balanced is not getting us 60, but performance is, which is at least a 1080p internal resolution as opposed to 720p internal resolution on Ultra Performance. So let's apply these, and the game definitely feels much better. Right, so 4K 60, or well, not really 4K 60, I know it's an upscaled 4K, so 1080p 60. upscale to 4K. This is definitely not the worst. So unfortunately, I have to go to performance DLSS, and as I said, there will be some issues with it. They always are, especially if you have to upscale this aggressively. Like, there will be some shimmering, some artifacting, etc. But at least it's playable. So if you do have a 4K monitor, it's definitely better to use DLSS and upscale to 4K than it is to play on a lower resolution and have your monitor upscale to 4K, that's for sure. So let's just see what happens if we enable frame generation here. And our final output is pretty much the same as previously, right? So we're getting around 80 frames per second. And when I say previously, I just mean on the Ultra preset with the DLSS Ultra Performance. Right, so I actually just want to see what happens if we drop down to the medium preset, if we can get away with the DLSS set to balanced at least. Not that this looks terrible, but let's just see what happens on the medium preset. Alright, so at 4K, no upscaling, no frame generation on the medium preset. So 4K native and getting 40 frames per second here. So 4K is not going to be viable for this GPU at all. If you remember, we didn't even hit 60 frames per second at 1080p on the Ultra preset. So this game is definitely demanding, unoptimized, however you want to call it. It's definitely not a bad looking game, but whether the visuals actually justify the performance, that's definitely another question. Although personally, in my opinion, I don't think the visuals do justify the performance. Once again, my opinion, I keep on saying that, but that's just it. Right, so let's just see what we need to do to get a playable frame rate here, what we need to do with DLSS. If we just go balanced, balanced looks pretty good, and quality. So I think we might be okay if we go DLSS quality here, and we should be able to maintain 60 frames per second. Now this is definitely much more like it. It seems like DLSS does help quite a lot in this game, as we've seen with the previous Unreal Engine 5 games like Remnant. It actually came out requiring you to use DLSS. There was a lot of outrage about that, if you guys remember, rightfully so. And it seems like over here it's just silly that the moment you disable DLSS super resolution, that the default is for the resolution scaling to drop below 50% or drop down to 50%, which just means that the game is demanding. Demanding is being used in air quotes in that context. Anyway, let's see if we enable frame generation. Yeah, so we're going from 70 frames per second to 80 frames per second. So that's just one thing with frame generation on this GPU at 4K. Doesn't seem to help a whole lot, and as I mentioned on the RTX 4060 videos as well, I think it's just the GPU is running very, very close to maximum, and it's probably so utilized or overutilized that frame generation doesn't really help much. So these guys with the blue ones, you actually have to go into Umbral and take the parasite and kill it before you can actually kill those guys. So I'm not going to be wasting too much time here. This is pretty much what the performance is like. At native, it's definitely terrible, especially on the high and the ultra presets. Going down to medium at higher resolutions, I'd say it's definitely worth it. But if you play it at 1080p or 1440p with an RTX 4070, DLSS quality seems to do the trick. And then you can enable DLSS frame generation as well, and you'd be able to get 120 to 130 frames per second, which is pretty decent. Alright, so I'll be doing one or two more videos on this game with an RX 7600 as well as an RTX 4060. So if you want to see that, make sure that you've got the notification bell enabled there. If you like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next one.